often those are guys who are very wounded individuals, just speaking from my own experience, who lack those role models, and they landed upon some movie poster, that they saw as, as being respected. Often they were people who were bullied in their youth and longed to be respected. This isn't a toxic masculinity. In some ways, it's kind of a broken, a tragic masculinity.
And this has been something, when I wrote my book, 7 Men, the impetus for that book was the idea, and this is about 10 years ago or so, but it is that one thing that has happened in America, and this is going back decades, is that the idea of what is a good man has become confused and then deconstructed and then vilified. And we need models of what is a good man. What does a good man look like? So I wrote my book, 7 Men, to say, here are 7 portraits of men that I would consider heroes. And I wrote a sequel, 7 Women. And the 7 women that I put up as heroes were great women precisely because they behaved like women. They weren't trying to do what men did, but they were trying to do what God created them to do. So these ideas are being deconstructed and destroyed by critical theory and by the Marxist, woke, crazy left. And the real result, ironically, as you're saying, is women get harmed. Women are harmed by the transgender madness that is happening. Women are harmed by giving a pass to Muslim rape gangs in Europe. And there is silence on the left and in the mainstream media. It's such a scandal.
Yeah, absolutely. I conducted, Eric, sort of my own, informal poll, not of people that I knew, but of people I didn't know, just random people. I had no idea who I was or even what my purpose was in asking the question, men, women, black and white. I asked them the question, what is an alpha male? What does that mean to you when you hear that? And the responses I got were fabulous. I was expecting people to say, we've been conditioned to say, that's some kind of toxic individual. Women in particular used words like courage and responsibility. They spoke of them as attractive, as saying that they wanted an alpha male if they were single, or, my spouse is of an alpha male, and I'm so grateful that he is, or I'm trying to raise my boys to be alpha males, meaning that they define them as really just regular guys. It wasn't really about the accoutrements of, the trappings of masculinity. It wasn't because they wore wife beaters or that they, were always, working in the garage on the car, or that they were, painted their face and went to football games every weekend. Rather, they were individuals who took a responsibility, manned up, if you will, for their own actions, and cared for the people for whom they were responsible. And I liked that definition because, there are plenty of men that I can think of, who aren't particularly interested in, in guns and aren't into sports and this sort of, but of whom I could say there's nothing feminine about them. You know what I mean? Like when I say this, and I think the word man, though it's difficult to define, we all know well enough what it is, and we know it when we see it. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Well, I would completely agree with it, and I think, again, it's why I wrote my book, 7 Men, because I thought this is not a one-size-fits-all. This is not like, to be a man, you've got to be like John Wayne, or you've got to be like... It's more than that, because when God creates us in his image, there are various aspects of his image, but we have to affirm what the Bible affirms, and what most people know is that if you're a man, being a man is a great thing. If you're a woman, being a woman is a great thing. And to denigrate those categories, either one or both, is to war ultimately against God, against what God did in making us in his image, male and female. We'll be right back talking to Larry Alex Taunton. Check him out at LarryAlexTaunton.com. Folks, welcome back. I have so many friends that write extraordinary things, and to the extent I can, I want to use this radio program and my social media to help you find these things, because there's a lot of garbage out there, and it seems to me that the best stuff often is ignored. I've shared the essays of my friend John Zmirak very often, and my friend Keith Junta. And now we're talking to Larry Alex Taunton. Larry, you've just written on so many subjects, but this is one that affects everyone's life today. And the title of it is Where Have All the Good Men Gone? So let's keep going about what is in that article.
Yeah, well, I think your 7 Men book, your 7 Women book, what we're talking about in part is the need for models. And I would want to say to any young person, who's listening, or even a man who has, maybe struggled, finding his own place, have good role models. Find good role models. And unfortunately, a lot of boys lacking, from broken homes, and this is particularly true within Muslim communities, where a man can have 4 wives and countless children. Often lacking those real role models in their lives, they instead look to someone like a rapper or a Sylvester Stallone or Jason Statham, movie character, or an athlete or a hip hop artist, someone who they see as powerful, respected, and sexually desirable, and they begin to model that. And that's unfortunate, not only for themselves but for society. For women, I would really encourage any young man who's out there who lacks that role model in their life, maybe because of an absentee or a weak father figure, find a real person in your life that you can model yourself after, who can set a standard for you, and do understand that they're sinners, that they will fail you, that our ultimate a model, and neither Eric nor I are saying that we're the models of masculinity. Jesus Christ established that model for us, but he gives us individuals in our lives after whom we can model ourselves, and I think that's incredibly important, having role models.
Now it's interesting because I'm sure I've talked to you about this, Larry, and I've mentioned it on the program, but when I was writing these biographies, and then I started writing 7 Men, 7 Women, 7 More Men, I hadn't originally intended I wasn't really clear until after I'd written the book, and I thought, part of the reason God led me to write these books is because we need role models. Now, first, we need them in our own lives, but also when you read the life of someone great, whether it's Wilberforce or Bonhoeffer or Jackie Robinson or all the people that I've written about, and on the women's side, Corrie ten Boom, you cannot help but be affected by it. And so we need to surround ourselves by people that inspire us, that call us higher, call us to be better people somehow. And you and I know that, if you had a dad like that, or an uncle or a grandfather, whatever, they were probably very flawed, but they still had the ability in some way to want to make you more like a good man. I had the privilege of my dad. I still have him in my life. My Uncle Joe, flawed people, but who nonetheless meant something to me when I didn't even realize it. And you're right, and you write about this in the article, Where Have All the Good Men Gone, at LarryAlexTaunton.com, that a lot of the problem is that there are many young men that don't have that. Yeah,
it's quite tragic. And they've landed. I even recall in my own youth, a lot of the individuals, Eric, that the left would call toxic males, the kind of the muscle-bound guy who looks into himself in the mirror as he's working out at the gym, and who maybe comes off as hyper masculine, and in some ways. Often those are guys who are very wounded individuals, just speaking from my own experience, who lack those role models, and they landed upon some movie poster, that they saw as being respected. Often they were people who were bullied in their youth and longed to be respected. This isn't a toxic masculinity. In some ways, it's kind of a broken, a tragic masculinity. But I think you're speaking of your own personal role models. My own father was an alcoholic, and he would not say that he was a very good father. But I'm so grateful to my dad because my father modeled for me real masculinity. And when my father was away during Vietnam, my mother was quite wise in recognizing that her boys needed the input of men. And she would say that a mother can raise boys, but she can't make them men. You need men to make men. So she had our uncles, interact with us. While my dad is a way-killing Marxist. This is what she did. She had the wisdom to recognize that and to encourage boyish pursuits. A lot of parents today aren't doing these things, and they need to.
Well, that's exactly right. And I mentioned in my book, the story of my life, Fish Out of Water. I talk about my dad, and the book is inadvertently a love letter to my dad. I didn't plan it that way, but when you read it in retrospect, you just see a man who is honest, a man who pays the bills, a man who doesn't lie or cheat. This is like the basic thing that you give as a gift to a family when you just do that. We're not talking about extra credit, crazy, heroic stuff. Just when you do that, because a lot of people don't do that, and you need to have those people in your life. And I think a lot of people listening right now, maybe they don't have kids or they don't have whatever. You can be that for somebody. There are all kinds of programs and things, and there are many churches that do these kinds of things. But this is at the heart of it all, Larry, and you touch upon this in the article, Where Have All the Good Men Gone? Because we need not just to aspire to be good men if we're men, but also to help other men become good men. They say boys will be boys. Oh, I've got a phrase, boys will be men. Are they going to be good men or not? That's kind of up to us. Larry, it's funny, I didn't mean to talk so much about my book, 7 Men, or the sequel, 7 More Men, but the first man in the book, 7 Men, is George Washington, and he was not a literal father, but he was the father of the country. So we're not just talking about, being an actual father. We're talking about it's a spiritual issue that God calls us, whether we are biological fathers or aren't, that we can be fathers and grandfathers and role models. And obviously the same goes for women. You can do that without actually having children of your own. You can be a loving, mothering influence. And this is really at the heart of civilization. You cannot have a beautiful, free civilization unless you have human beings who understand this issue.
Yeah, and you touch on, you anticipate really where I want to go with this, and that is that we have different types of role models. I don't just have one. I've had many. I've had professional role models. I've had figures in my life who model a variety of things that I have wanted to emulate. I was so fortunate. In fact, I just put out a little Twitter thread on mentors. Individual. I wouldn't say they were, father figures for me, but they were mentors for me professionally. They developed my skill as a writer. They demanded excellence from me. They pushed me to be more than I thought that I could be. Those were role models for me. They continue to be role models to me. I still hear their voices, in my head, as I'm working on an essay or as I'm thinking of taking a shortcut in writing a book. I can hear them rebuking and correcting. It's like, no, we don't do that. So there are all sorts of role models that I'm grateful for, and I'm sure you've had them too.
Well, that's what's so interesting. I mean, I think about the fact that my dad, because he grew up in war-torn Europe, couldn't be a role model for me in some ways. He didn't know how to throw a football or a baseball like that. He didn't have time for sports, when he was being shot at or looking for food. But God put in my life my Uncle Joe, who passed away, who was a profound influence on me. And I think of my dearest friend, John Tomanio, his dad, who just passed away this year, was in many ways a second father to me, who took us camping. And I just think that a lot of the folks who have had the biggest effects on our lives maybe we'll never get a chance to tell them. So this is an opportunity to say to you out there, if you're listening, folks, if there's somebody like that in your life, let them know. Let them know that without them realizing it, they may have played a role in your being a good person, the person you are today.